Welcome back to another edition of the podcast, and today is our Game Week 45 National League preview and predictions. I'm joined by Sam Collyer tonight. He's stepping in for Paul once again. Sam, it's a pleasure to have you on once again on the podcast.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be back. It's a bit of a different scene today. I've got I was using my phone, but no, it's been a while since I've been on, so I'm really looking forward to being back.
Yeah, to be fair, obviously you mentioned that you've previously just been on DAZN, haven't you, with the National League? For me, obviously, I'd be so scared, like in person. I suppose it's a little bit. You've got a bit of a barrier, haven't you, behind a camera? I suppose in a way.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was absolutely bricking it when I turned up. It was a bit nervy getting going, but once you get into the flow of it all, it was quite good. But yeah, it's a great experience.
Brilliant. And I know I didn't actually watch the multi-match because I was at a game, but I watched the podcast and I have to say you came across very well on there. But yeah, it's good to have you back on this show as well. Of course, it's a huge week in terms of the National League. Barnet can mathematically confirm their promotion to the EFL. All they need is a point, or even York to drop points on Saturday would mean that Barnet would return to the EFL. At the other side of the table, Maidenhead and Dagenham can mathematically get relegated as well, depending on other results. And of course, in terms of the playoffs, it's wide open for the likes of Southend and even Altrincham on the final day for them to actually clinch a playoff spot and overtake Halifax and Gateshead. So it's certainly my favourite time of the season, and I suppose a lot of people's favourite time of the season too. Firstly, coming in tonight, we've had AJ who's coming and said, "Evening, Luke," and I think he thought Paul was here, but I think it's to you now, Sam. "Evening, Luke and Sam. I'm buzzing for this weekend. Barnet will put in a massive performance. Thanks, Oldham. I can finally calm down when this season ends, and that pitch invasion would be epic, by the way." Yeah, how big of a moment could this potentially be for Barnet if they do manage to clinch promotion mathematically on Saturday?
That's going to be massive, isn't it? Yeah, as I say, it's been a bit of a shaky last few match days. I think it was 2 draws in a row. And there was a few questions being raised whether if they ever had the bottle to see it through, because obviously they've had previous occasions where maybe they haven't always rose to the occasion in question. But no, it's going to be a massive week. They really kind of put the critics to bed against Sutton at the weekend, and I think this week it's going to be huge. Only 1 point. I think a game against Aldershot, who aren't in the best of form themselves, I think there's no better opportunity than to clinch a title.
Certainly a significant week in terms of the history of Barnet to get back in the Football League. It's so close now for them. I believe even if they lost both games and York won them, I think they'd still get promoted on goal difference because I think it's the far superior compared to York. But still, to be able to do it mathematically, it must be brilliant, particularly at home at the Hive as well. They could have, if results had gone their way a few weeks ago, they could have won it at Sutton. But I suppose being at home it's a better place to win the league title, isn't it, at home? But I suppose if I was in that position, I certainly wouldn't care. I just want to get in the Football League.
No, definitely. As I say, you always want to win at home, don't you? I mean, get the fans. They'll all be on the pitch. I'm sure by the end, it's where you want to be. And I touched a few days ago on how Barnet have kind of got to this position, and they're more than deserving of it all. They've built over the last few years. And I touched on Dean Brennan being, a role model to the club in terms of his passion and, what he expects and how he can kind of portrays that. So, it's going to be a huge day for them, and they absolutely deserve it all.
He's made Barnet more competitive in the last couple of years. Prior to him coming in, Barnet were probably in the worst position of their history. They were looking like they could potentially drop in to the National League South. He's come in, he's completely turned it around there, not just from being competitive in the National League, but now to being a club that's champions-elect. He's done an absolutely fantastic job. I know there's always comments, isn't there, about the budget of Barnet, but for me, I think if you're going to get out of the National League, particularly nowadays, you've got to have financial backing to win the league title. Potentially through the playoffs, you can find your way up. But to win the league title, you've got to be financially backed. And for me, Barnet haven't got the biggest budget in the National League, but they've certainly got one of the bigger budgets. But for them to still be able to do it and win the title, just massive plaudits to Dean Brennan. And for me, I think you can't really argue with this. He'd will be my National League manager of the season. However, you could potentially look at Tamworth's manager and the job he's done there, because I think he's done equally as good job in a completely different way.
Yeah, I mean, Pete's at Tamworth's done an absolutely exceptional job this season. I mean, going into it, probably wrongfully, most people probably had them to finish rock bottom of the league, but I think that's a testament of how well he's done this year. He's a serial overachiever at Tamworth, and he's always been, an exceptional manager. It's maybe not the most appealing style of football, but it's efficient, and he gets the best out of the players he has, and he signs players and he utilises players in a certain system that works in their favour. And there was even a point this year where Tamworth looked actually like they may have crept into the playoffs, which is just absolutely absurd to me. So yeah, I think personally, I might say Pete for me as manager of the season, but Dean Brennan, he definitely can't be overshadowed in terms of what he's done this season for the club.
Yeah, he certainly can. I think there's a few managers, but for me, those are the two in totally different ways. They have to be the two that stand out to me. I think even at York clearly got a big budget. But I think Hinchelwood deserves a massive amount of applause for what he's done. And, you speak about, I know we always speak about budgets within sides and buying the league and statements like that have been thrown around for different clubs in the past in the National League. But you can have all the money in the world. It doesn't necessarily, you have to spend it well and you have to recruit well and you have to manage the players well. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to come off. We've seen in the past, a lot of clubs have quite well backed and it's clearly not come off there. Whereas at York, what I can say is it feels like long term they're going to get back into the Football League. And I say long term, they could very easily, I say easily, they're probably the favourites, aren't they, in the playoffs to do it this season. But of course, even if they don't go up, for me, we've seen the pattern that seems to be going on at the moment. Whoever doesn't go up, who's finished second or third, all go up the following season. For example, last year, Chesterfield won the league. Barnet came second. They're going to go up this season. I think it's inevitable that they're going to get promoted. The year before, Chesterfield came third actually, behind Notts and Wrexham, who both got promoted. Chesterfield lost in the playoff final. They got promoted the following season. The year before, Wrexham came second, got promoted the following season. There's clearly, to me, a pattern that's being portrayed at the moment in the National League. And if it isn't York's time this season to go through the playoffs, next season, you'd like to think they can go out and win the league. But of course, we'll come on to next season when the season ends, but there'll be clubs that are going to be strengthening heavily, aren't they, in the summer, like Woking, perhaps.
Yeah, it's going to be a huge summer, really. We're probably going to go into another season next year where, similarly to this one, really, there isn't a standout runaway in terms of who the favourite for the league is. Obviously Barnet did start the season probably as the favourites, but you do look at the previous years and Chesterfield, Wrexham, teams like that, Stockport, from minute one, they were always, touted to kind of storm the division, and they have. So I think, again, it could be another season next year where it's almost even more competitive this year than it ever has been. And I think a few teams will look at that and they'll look at the, an opportunity there to maybe propel themselves up the table. You mentioned Woking there. I'd love to see us make a bit more of a push. Time will tell in terms of January recruitment, but as you mentioned, financial backing is one thing, but spending the money correctly and wisely is a complete different thing. We've seen, even this season, teams like Ebbsfleet, they didn't spend small amounts. They had a fair budget, and they got it all wrong. And it's a bit of a reality check to how on it you have to be at this level to really succeed. But I'm certainly looking forward to the summer, that's for sure, and seeing what people add to their teams.
Well, even Eastleigh, for me, they're always a club that have known to have quite a big budget in this division, yet every season seem to fail to achieve what they set out to achieve, which is playoffs at least. And once again, it's a season for them that I think is ending in disappointment. It's certainly been an exciting season for me. And of course, everyone will say it's a cliche. We want to promote the National League because it's, a podcast that I run on it. But what I will say is the fact that you look at this compared to previous years. Last year was in terms of entertainment value of the division, was particularly poor with placements. The title was done by Christmas. Chesterfield were champions-elect by then. The playoff race was probably the only slightly interesting thing about last season, and maybe a little bit about the relegation battle, but there wasn't a top 3 races as such. Bromley, Barnet and Chesterfield were ahead of everyone else. So it's been a little bit more exciting for me this season than what it's been in previous years. And yeah, I think across the board, and I'm saying across the board, it's been the best National League season that I've seen. Of course, people will say the Notts Wrexham year, but that was another year. That title race basically stole the headline of the division. If you looked at everything else that happened on that season in terms of the playoffs and relegation battle, it wasn't as exciting as what it's been at the moment. And I think we're getting to a point of the season now where you can kind of understand where everyone's going to finish this season with only 2 games remaining. Ebbsfleet filed, their future's set. They're both going into the National League North and South. Maidenhead and Dagenham, there's a slight chance that they could still survive. Do you think it's a possibility that they still survive this season? Of course, Dagenham 2 points away from safety with 2 games to go, and Maidenhead 4 points away from safety with 2 games to go.
Yeah, I mean, there's every chance both of them could, definitely. I definitely expect both of them to take it to the final day, make it a bit of a blockbuster season ending. But I covered the Wealdstone Maidenhead game on DAZN on Monday, and I was at Woking Maidenhead on Friday. And having seen Maidenhead in those 2 matches, I think I'm probably leaning towards the fact that they end up going down. It's not a very Devonshire-like team for me. They seem to be quite frail defensively, and they seem a bit erratic in the box, so that they're struggling to clear crosses, and they're not as efficient and physical as you would expect a Devonshire team to be. Dagenham, everyone's seen all the stuff that's gone on off the pitch with Dagenham. So if they were to survive, it would be unbelievable, really. The club's been in a right state for the last couple of weeks, and that they seem to be picking up a few results here and there. It's just whether it's going to be enough. But no, I'm really excited to see how the relegation scrap kind of turns out now, especially now Woking are safe. But I do think you look at it in even Aldershot now are 6 points off the drop and face Barnet on Saturday, so it could be a bit nervy for even the likes of them and Braintree and even Boston come the final day, because with 2 games left to play, it's still all to play for now.
I think Wealdstone will be kicking themselves, particularly if Maidenhead played poor, that they didn't pick up all 3 points, because there would really be a gap there. There'd be that cushion now for them to only have to really be able to pick up 1 point, I think, if they'd have actually won that game to mathematically survive this season. You look at their remaining 2 fixtures, Southend away, chasing a playoff spot, Halifax Town as well at home on the final day. That could be a huge game, that. Of course, myself and Paul co-host the podcast usually, and we could be facing off each other with Halifax needing something to get in the playoffs and Wealdstone needing something to survive. So that could be a bit of a cracker on the final day. But yeah, you look at those fixtures, and I think on paper, you'd say they're underdogs in both of those games. However, particularly the Halifax game, we don't know after this weekend, but Halifax don't seem to be the same side. They seem to be limping at the moment. So that could be a game for Wealdstone to be able to get that win. But Southend away, very, very inconsistent. But at home, you'd like to think they could get the job done on paper in that game. Of course, we're going to come on to our prediction shortly, and my actual prediction might be very different on what they should do. But Southend chasing a playoff spot, there's a massive opportunity now. It feels like Gates and Halifax have opened the door for Southend to get in the playoffs now. Of course, they're 2 points off the playoffs at the moment. And if they do win on Saturday and Gateshead lose or Halifax lose, they'll be in the playoffs towards the final day.
Yeah, I mean, Southend are definitely one I'm keeping an eye on. They've grafted the season. It's no secret that it's been quite up and down for them. They've had a few rough patches. I don't really feel like they properly replaced Cardwell when he left it earlier in the season. I think they have struggled for goals at times, but they are in some really good form at the moment. And if they go and win on Saturday, the final day of the season, it's in Southend's hands to get in the playoffs, because they face Gateshead on the final match. So that'd be huge for them if they can get in there. And I think in previous seasons it's been highlighted that momentum's everything going into the playoffs, and
Mhm.
in the form that they're in, and seeing, like you said, the likes of Rochdale, Halifax, they're kind of limping along at the moment a little bit. I think Southend will be looking at that and they'd be fairly confident going into the playoffs because they've got the momentum on their side. So that'll be certainly interesting watch. But like you said, it's all coming down to the fight. It all come down to the wire this season. It's extremely entertaining. Top and bottom of the league. So but Southend is definitely one that I'm really looking out for at the moment, and I back them to get playoffs by the end of the season, I think.
Suppose those who've mathematically already confirmed a playoff spot now, the likes of Oldham, Forest Green, and even York, will be hoping that Southend don't sneak into the playoffs and get in. They'll probably like the fact that you look at Halifax and Gateshead at the moment and probably think, you know what, they're wounded animals. We've got an opportunity there to get through. It should be a very winnable game. Southend, who are on form coming into the playoffs, no pressure on them whatsoever. The type of team that Southend are as well, they're not a team that I'd want to be playing in the playoffs if I was a York or an Oldham, because on a one-off occasion, they could easily grind out a result and get something. And you remember Grimsby and the story of them getting promoted. I see a lot of similarities with Southend getting in the playoffs and doing something along those lines. So there'd certainly be a side that I'd be wanting to avoid in the playoffs. Whereas Halifax and Gateshead, once upon a time, I'd have said Halifax could potentially do something in the playoffs and cause some damage. However, with the amount of injuries that we've had at the moment, even if we do limp over the line, there's an important thing I say there, limp over the line. If you're in a race and you're limping over the line and you manage to, come third, let's say, come seventh, like we have done, or sixth, and then you have to do another race afterwards, you're not going to perform in the following race if you're limping, and that's exactly what I could see happening inside the playoffs if we do maintain a playoff spot. And at the moment, it's very doable that we do fall short of the playoffs, and it's the case with Gateshead as well. They've been unfortunate with injuries too.
Yeah, like you said, it's getting to that point of the season where the injuries, but they pile up a little bit, and teams start to kind of they're on their last legs. The year Woking got in the playoffs, we saw that kind of at the back end of the season. We kind of limped across the line and then played Bromley in the first eliminator round and just kind of run out of steam and couldn't get over the line there. It's been a great season for Halifax in terms of finding a level of consistency, but now they are just kind of scraping along. I do think one saving grace for Halifax will probably be the fact that Gateshead do seem to be struggling slightly as a side. That does kind of it worries me, Gateshead, a little bit, how the form that they're in, because they do look like you said, a real wounded animal at the moment. They've had to kind of adapt all season to kind of being picked apart in January. Now they've got a fair few injuries. So I think, I would not be surprised if out of Halifax and Gateshead, only one of them would to end up in the playoffs this season. But I would probably put my money on Halifax just getting across the line. I think they've got more. They're a bit more of a sensible side in the way that they play to Gateshead. I think they can grind out results better. So I think I think Halifax will be okay in the end. Oh, is Luke? Luke, you there? I think we lost Luke. Let me see if I can quickly contact him. Not sure what's going on here. Let me see if where he's up to, where he's off to. Oh, we got this loading. Luke, you there, mate? Let's see. Possible technical difficulties. It looks like I've been left alone here. Yeah, let me just see where he's off to. We will. I'm sure he'll be back soon. Uh, uh, let's just quickly check the messages from him. He must be somewhere. God, it's all going wrong at the moment. I can't even get into my messages. He should just be back in a second. Apologies, everyone. Technical difficulties every now and again. Trying to see where he's gone off to. Okay, cool. It'll be just 2 seconds. And so I'll ask a question to the chat if anyone's still here at the moment. Who do you lot think will end up in that playoff spot in the end? Do you reckon Southend will do it, or do you reckon it will be Halifax or Gateshead will just get across the line? Yeah, he'll be returning in a second. Yeah, Southend do have the momentum at the moment. To be fair, I'm quite. I think other teams will be looking at Southend and be quite worried going into the playoffs. Um, that's the thing with Southend. If they can just pick up one more result this weekend, then suddenly it's all in their hands because they play Gateshead on the final day, and that'll be an absolute. That'll be huge, that match. I reckon they might beat Gateshead. They don't have the greatest record at Gateshead, to be fair, but I think it feels like a different scenario at the moment. 4-0 against Ebbsfleet wasn't that impressive. As I say, yeah, Ebbsfleet picks it up a little bit recently. They've got a bit more structure under Josh Wright. Wasn't enough to keep them up, but they've done all right recently. Picked up a couple wins. I'm quite looking forward to the back end of the season now. Even relegation scraps looking quite interesting at the moment. I think Dagenham are they're hanging on to the last moment at the moment, giving themselves every chance. Yeah, Wilson do have a big say in it. It's a huge fixture, set of fixtures for Wildstone. I covered the game on Monday on the Zone, and they did kind of Alex Reid didn't have the greatest game, and I think all in all they probably should have won the game, but that's for another day that they'll have to leave it. I think as a Gateshead fan, I think we'll hold on for a playoff spot. I also think Halifax will, which isn't great for us. Who do you reckon's coming up to the NL? Ooh, it's difficult to predict anything who's coming up. I think in the South, if anyone's going to win the playoffs, I think Dorking will have it. But I think the finals day of the season. I think Truro might draw or lose to St Albans, who are fighting for their life, and I think Torquay will win the league. In the north, I think Kidderminster will win the league. I'm pretty confident with that. And I think Scunthorpe will win the playoffs. Brackley do not have a good record in the playoffs at all, so that'll be interesting to see. That's for sure. Trying to get my messages up from Luke. See what the deal is. Might just have to. Yeah, Eastbourne and Worthing. Eastbourne have gone full time now as well. So that's quite a big it's a big advantage at that level. Truro. I'm shocked at Truro this year. I did not think they had it in them at the moment, but here we are. They're doing an exceptional job. I don't know what's going to happen here. I need to quickly just swipe off this on my phone. We'll There we go. I'm back. It's asking me for a verification thing to get into mine.
Are we all right? I'm back.
There we go.
Yeah. Cheers for holding the fort, by the way. I've just seen back on YouTube wondering what were happening, and it looks like I've just thought I've had enough and just turned the blooming.
Yeah, it looked like it just fell. No, I just got some questions in, and keeping the chat company.
Well, yeah, cheers for holding the fort anyway. But basically, what happened was it says here on my Mac that my iPhone's charging. Not my iPhone, my MacBook's charging, I should say, because it's got the light on. Then I looked in the top screen and it wasn't. And then it just suddenly, the screen went off, but you're still talking. And then it just died. And then I think I was actually still put the computer down and then restarted it. But anyway, we're back anyway. I can't remember what we was even on about before.
Neither. I've lost my train of thought. We were just talking with I was talking to the chat about the National League North and South who's coming up. But where were we? I've forgotten.
I think I've got all the comments from the actual start. I don't know because I was trying to watch it a little bit while it was loading. And I don't think we've actually gone right from the start. So if we go from the start, we could do that and then get onto the predictions. I know the podcast being respectable and professionals going right down the drain now, to be honest. But no, it's good I've got it all sorted, and hopefully that does not happen again. Because it says it's on 6% and it is charging, so I'm hoping that it is. Anyway, we've got Paul who's come in, and he said, "Evening from Bratislava. No disrespect to Sam, but I was hoping to give Paul some stick ahead of the Shrimpers 6-pointer game against Luton of their own 6-pointer roll on Saturday." Yeah, it's a huge game. It probably is, apart from the Barnet game, because of what can happen if they win the game or get a point. This is game of the game week. I'd probably say it is because there's something on the line for both sides at different ends of the table as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's a huge fixture. It's going to be one of those ones where I don't think form will exactly come into it. I think it's going to be just it's going to be scrappy. It's going to be a bit of a slogfest. But that's kind of what you expect at this level for two teams who are really, really fighting out for something. I do think Southend will probably have the quality to come out just on top, but I'm really looking forward to that. I'll certainly be tuning into that game, that's for sure.
Yeah, of course, we've got our predictions coming up. It might be a little bit longer now. I don't know how long it was actually gone, about 5 minutes, I think. So hopefully not too long. But David's coming in and said he's a Maidenhead fan. Even Luke Samuel, Coughlin at Boston deserves huge applaudits. Incredible turnaround today. Yeah, it just must be frustrating for Maidenhead because of what Boston have done, the actual turnaround there. Because Maidenhead, for me, in recent weeks, although they're not particularly playing well, they've picked up the odd results. I suppose for them, they'll just be kicking themselves. Although they didn't play well and they may have been a little bit fortunate to get anything out of that game, they'll be kicking themselves that they didn't turn up and they didn't win there, because against a side down near the bottom, they're the games where you've got to be winning them. It's certainly a better point for Wealdstone than it was for Maidenhead.
Yeah, you mentioned Coughlin there and the turnaround he's had at Boston, and it's just it's unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it, really. We did a podcast. I think the last podcast I was on, actually, or one of the last ones. We were talking about Boston, and someone mentioned, they really think they have the ability to turn it around, especially looking at the fixtures they have. And I think from that point onwards, they've just absolutely flown. They've got a great structure under Coughlin. He knows who his strongest team are, and they've made what people kind of thought was the impossible look extremely easy, which is not something you see very often. And going full time next year, Coughlin contracted, so he'll still be there. They could be, with a good summer behind them, they could be a force next year.
We had Christine James on, who's a Boston supporter, just after they'd beaten, I think, York and drawn to Barnet. And he actually came on and said, I've worked out mathematically, we're going to probably have to average 2 points a game to survive. And I said, listen, although you've picked up the results against Barnet and York, for me, I just think it's too much of an ask for you to average 2 points a game until the end of the season. Because it is like probably someone who finishes in, you'd probably just, you'd finish where York are if you're averaging 2 points a game all season. So, yeah, they've certainly done the unthinkable, haven't they, Boston, and been able to, what looks like they're going to survive. Of course, they do still need to pick up 1 point to mathematically survive, but you'd like to think they can do in the next 2 games.
Yeah, you'd be gutted if they didn't, that's for sure. Yeah. To do what they've done, to fall at the final hurdle will be absolutely devastating, even if you're not a Boston fan. But I'm pretty confident they'll get it done. They're playing, I believe, they're playing Gateshead at the weekend at home. And I look at that and I think Boston are probably a side that could pick up a win there. We spoke about Gateshead, and they're quite a wounded side at the moment. They're kind of limping across the line, and I think they're there to be taken advantage of right now. But no, it's easy to forget with Boston at this stage of the season that they are still kind of in that relegation threat because of how many games they've won recently. But it just goes to show how deep they were in that relegation zone. Yet they've managed to, not even just claw their way out of it, they've literally climbed out of it with ease, which is just unbelievable. So yeah, I'm really hoping, I can definitely say, like I said, now Woking is safe. I can definitely say I do hope they do stay up this season now.
There was a point at, I think it was just before Christmas, where there were only 4 or 5 points that separated Ebbsfleet and Boston, and that's ridiculous to consider the position that Boston are in now, and the amount of points that they've picked up. Massive plaudits have to go to the manager and the players overall, because Boston, Tamworth, the 2 favourites to go down at the end of the season, they've both significantly overachieved, particularly Boston in the second half of the season. And they've both got stronger as the season's gone on. I actually thought if they were to survive, it'd be crucial for them to have got enough points before Christmas to be in a good enough position and away from the drop zone points towards the end of the season when they get figured out and they might have 1 or 2 injuries. Yet both sides have just gone from strength to strength as the season's gone on.
Yeah, it's massively impressive. As we mentioned with Boston, it was a case of kind of picking their strongest team now. The likes of Jacob Hazel, he's got a fair few goal contributions this season. I want to say he's got more than 20 goals and assists. That's a great number. That's a brilliant number for him to have. He's kind of picking up the oldest goal and assist there, but he's really flourishing in that Coughlin system as a height-heavy presser. Frankie Maguire in midfield, he kind of, locks that midfield down. He's very composed on the ball. He scored a beautiful free kick the other day as well. But I do think, the turnaround that they've kind of, they've managed is just, like I said, it's almost like they've made it look easy. And I can't, I think people looking at how easy they've made it look, it kind of makes people almost take for granted what they've done. But yeah, it's been nothing short of exceptional.
We've also got Villa TV who's come in tonight and said, big up lads, up the Tamworth. We have been good this season, deserved something versus Forest Green, but didn't take our chances. Yeah, that's the only unfortunate thing towards the end of the season now, is the fact that Tamworth can't get in the playoffs now, but don't take away anything. This has been a massive, massive successful season. They've overachieved significantly. I think at the start of the season, their main aim was to finish 1 point above the drop zone, and to see the teams that they have outperformed with the budget and even squad that they've got overall, you have to give a massive applaudits to Andy Peakes and those individuals playing there.
Yeah, they've absolutely outdone themselves this year. I do feel for them a bit, really. Being a part-time team, you do run out of steam a little bit towards the end of the season. But just to make matters worse, just a few days after the transfer window closed, George Morrison got recalled by Fleetwood. Ronan Maher got recalled by Walsall. That's two key players just ripped away from them after the point where they're even able to replace them, which is, that's brutal. And that was just when it looked like they may have a chance of just creeping into the playoffs if they could put a good run together. Like I said, they're a very efficient side. You won't see them come and try and play you off the park. They'll play direct football. They'll threaten you with Tom Tonk's long throws and, take advantage of set pieces. But, that's what they've always been about. And, that's them utilising what they have as a part-time team and making the most of the assets that they do have. Next season, I'd be surprised next season. Again, I probably shouldn't underestimate them again. But, I'd be surprised if they could maintain what they've done this year. But given the fact that they are one of the very few part-time teams at this level, I think anything better than survival, it's a huge bonus, really.
Yeah, it brings me on to being able to plug the recent interview I actually did with Tamworth manager Andy Peakes, and we actually talked a little bit about next season and his aims, and he actually said that we've significantly overachieved next season. The budget's not changing next year compared to this year, the playing budget. So the main aim is that we set our same achievement is the achievement. The same aim is the aim that we had at the start of this season, which was to survive by one clear point. And I think that is the aim, as he mentioned, for them next season. And I suppose in Tamworth's position is the fact that they're still part-time. They're having to compete with some huge clubs in this division. They've got a lot of not issues behind the fields, but pet aches, I suppose, with them being a part-time club and not having one of the biggest budgets in the league, although they are very well run and they've certainly not overachieved this season, but in the last couple of years, back-to-back promotions, they had no right to get out of the National League North. When you think of some of the clubs that they were competing with, and to do it in the fashion they did is exceptional. To then come into the National League, there's no words to describe how well they've done this season, Tamworth, overall. Anyway, we've spoke about title races. Of course, the National League South's got one. The National League might be done and dusted now. However, myself and Paul, I might as well just call it the guest at this point. I've got our own title race at the moment, the Predictions League. Of course, I'm on 196 points. Paul is on 196 points. You couldn't write it at all. And there's been points of the season for the majority where I've been way in the lead. And then people have come in to help Paul out to get him back up to speed and keep him in the title, in the Predictions League race, we'll call it. Whereas now, to be fair, in the last week or so, he's outdone me, to be honest. He's done very well. Sam, it's not a good time to bring someone like yourself on. Two games to go, and I'm bringing on a National League analyst.
So I'll do my best for Paul. I do my predictions every week. I post them up, and the best I can ask for usually is predicting 10 outcomes, 6 outcomes correct. It's a mental league; it's hard to predict, but I'll do my best.
Yeah, it's at the point of the season where this is such a significant game week, because let's say you have an outstanding week compared to me. Let's say you get 14 points, which is what Paul got, I think, not last week, the week before. And I got something like 5, which I did. The Predictions League will be more or less done and dusted. So, yeah, it's a huge week in terms of the Predictions League. So
no pressure then. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll have a quick glance at the table before we do get onto the predictions. For those who want to play along as well, it's 3 points for getting the exact result correct. That's, for example, predicting Barnet to beat Aldershot by 2-0 and Barnet winning 2-0. You get 3 points. If Barnet won, let's say, 3-0, you'd only get 1 point. Whereas if Aldershot drawed or won, then you'd get 0 points. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys, for those who want to play along. And also you can put your predictions in the comments and count up the amount of scores that you've got. I know a few of you like to do that. Looking at the table at the moment, of course, Barnet need a point to mathematically confirm it. To be fair, the goal difference isn't as superior to Barnet as I actually thought it was. Only 4 goals. And, you know, if Barnet lose both games and York win them, which you'd expect them to do, then you'd like to think that York could actually win the league. So it is technically doable, but still, it's certainly in Barnet's hands. They haven't lost at home all season, and they're playing against an Aldershot side who are struggling at the moment in terms of the league.
Yeah, I was going to say that 7-2 win the other day against Aldershot for York, you know, that did wonders for the goal difference. You know, I think that's probably one of the significant parts about it, really, that, you know, where Barnet did, you know, go and lose a game and draw twice. You know, York went on an absolute rampage, and I'm pretty sure they put 4 goals past someone, then another 3, then put 7 past Aldershot. You know, and it kind of, you know, showed that they were really there to mean business. You know, like you said, anything can happen at this level, but you'd like to think that the title's probably wrapped up by now. I'd be extremely shocked if Barnet lost the last 2 games.
Altrincham find themselves within a realistic chance of getting back in the playoffs now. A couple of weeks ago, it seemed very unrealistic after the recent form, but they had a huge win away at Halifax, beating them by 3-0. I think that has kind of opened the door them and made fans and the players realise that, listen, Halifax at the moment aren't all that, Gateshead aren't all that, Southend are very inconsistent. We've got a realistic chance here of getting inside the playoffs this season. As for Hartlepool, Eastleigh and Solihull, disappointing seasons overall for them. All got very respectable budgets in this division and have all underachieved. I think at the start of the season, all 3 sides would have wanted to finish inside the playoffs, and neither of them have. However, Solihull, 3 wins on the bounce. It's confirmed them a spot in the National League next season. Hartlepool picked up a bit of good form recently overall. Suppose they'll just be kicking themselves because, you know, all they needed is probably another 2 wins, and they would have had a realistic chance of getting in the playoffs at the end of the season themselves at the moment.
Yeah, I would definitely say that both of those, Hartlepool and Solihull especially, have massively underachieved this year. I had both of those in my top 7 predicted before the season began. We touched on Eastleigh earlier. They do seem to spend a bit each year, but they seem to quite, you know, comfortably fall short. It's been a couple of years now where they've just about missed out on playoffs by a small number of points. But yeah, I think all 3 teams will be, you know, kicking themselves a little bit, especially Solihull. I think, you know, they were in a really, really good position when you know, Wing left, and although that was out of their control, you know, the appointment of Taylor, you know, it hasn't exactly gone to plan, I wouldn't say. Well, I think, yes, it definitely hasn't gone to plan, but you know, 3 wins on the bounce now, and, you know, they seem to kind of be coming into their own a little bit, which will be positive for them come start of next season, going in with some momentum and some positivity. But you know, Hartlepool as well, I just you know, they seem to have just slipped up at the wrong times. You know, again, managerial changes. And just all around this season, I think Hartlepool have kind of underperformed. I think they're trying to fit players into a system at the moment that isn't really what they're meant to be playing. And I think it kind of just hinders them massively at the stage. But then again, all 3 come next season, if they spend in the right areas, will be, you know, more than capable of you know, kicking on. So yeah, there'll definitely be 3 teams to watch out for come next season. But yeah, I definitely say it's been disappointing this year for them.
Out of these 3 teams in order at the moment, of course, it can change. Who do you see being the most successful and the least successful next season?
I think Hartlepool next season will be the most successful out of the 3. That's crazy to say because they've got, you know, some trouble off the field at the moment in terms of finding a new owner. And, you know, but I do think if you give Limbrick a summer to, you know, bring in some players to suit the way he wants to play, you know, I think they'll play some really fluid football and, you know, they'll get going. Eastleigh, they're always just in and around it. I'm really unsure, to be fair, what Eastleigh need to kind of, you know, take them to that next level. They do have game winners in Shade and McCallum, who maybe hasn't hit the heights this year, but they just seem to go through purple patches of playing really well, picking up loads of points and, losing loads of games on the bounce. And they just seem to lack that consistency. And with Solihull, I just think, I think they'll be mid-table next season. It's going to be a huge readjustment for them with Taylor in charge. And, I don't think he's quite, solidified himself there. 3 wins on the bounce is good for them. But, I think he still needs to kind of settle in a bit more with Taylor. And, I think it could be a mid-table finish for them next year.
Finally, before we do get on to the predictions, your side Woking as well. Certainly had an awful start to the season. I suppose you were dreading the National League this season, being a Woking support with the issues off the field. The future's bright there now. We've seen that they've already invested, I suppose, in the players in January with certain incomings and outgoings and bringing Neil Ardley in, a quality manager. They're a club for me next season that I could see thriving and significantly improving under Neil Ardley. And it'll be interesting to see how they recruit in the summer, because although they've recruited already this season, no one's particularly sure how much money they actually have at the moment to be able to spend.
Yeah, it's all a bit up in the air at the moment. But, we've got Jody Brown in as a director of football, Neil Ardley and Simon Bassey as manager and assistant. They've done an unbelievable job. Since the turn in the year, only Barnet have lost more games than us. Albeit we've drawn a fair few, but we seem to be turning those draws into wins now at the back end of the season. We do have a fair few players we need to try and tie down to contracts. But, the form the team are in at the moment and the project that they've got, I can see those players buying into it. I'm very excited for next season. What Ardley's done, he's turned it around, absolutely exceptionally. He's kind of simplified the football a little bit, but it's suited what we have a bit better, and players are being used in the right ways. So yeah, it's absolutely brilliant to see, really. And I would like to see us be a bit more ruthless at times. There have been a few shaky games where we've maybe drawn because we've tried to hang on to a 1-goal lead. But no, I'm really excited for next season, and I'm sure the owners will be looking at maybe not throwing money, throwing the kitchen sink at it and going overboard, but backing Ardley because he's more than deserving of it after what he's done this season.
Neil Ardley and Woking, for me, it just feels like a perfect fit. I'm not particularly sure why. I'm sure if I could go in depth with it if I did a bit of research, but I don't know. It just feels like the perfect fit for Neil Ardley. I look at certain clubs and I think, well, that probably won't fit him. Even some of the bigger clubs in this division as well. But for me, I just feel like it really does fit there, and I can see him being successful at Woking, particularly with the squad. That is one of the reasons that he's got the squad that is embedded. A lot of the players that are very capable of doing much better things next season, and he's very well known to getting the best out of players, particularly ones who he's already managed in the past. So for me, I think it'll be interesting to see how Woking do next season, because I see them having a good season next year and putting a bit of a push together to get inside the playoffs. But who knows? You never know with how Woking may recruit. They could even be in a title race. Yeah, maybe I'm being a bit too optimistic there.
I wish
on them. Yeah, you never know though. Like, to be fair, when Matt Ugler first came in, I didn't expect York to spend the money like they did, and the money that they did spend, I know it took them 2 years, but you look at them now and they're in a great position compared to the position they were in. 2 final questions then before we get onto the predictions. We've got, how do you see Morecambe doing in the National League next season? Of course, their fate is confirmed. They're the first new side to be joining the National League next season. For me, Morecambe, it's hard to say. I would probably say lower mid-table, something like that. I don't think they're a massive basket case where they're going to slip through the net, but I think they'll probably just be mid-table next year for me. Of course, Carlisle, it's all but confirmed, you may say, for them to be dropping down next season as well. They have to win both games, I think, and hope that Tranmere don't pick up a single point. And they'll be an interesting one because they're a huge club who've not been managed right off the field in the past couple of years. It'll be interesting to see how they do next year. But yeah, Morecambe mid-table for me. What about you, Sam?
So I'm in the middle of preparing a recruitment document for Morecambe. So I've actually spoke to quite a few Morecambe fans as of late, and kind of try to gather the expectations, budget, player retentions, etc. I think they'll be fighting the drop next season. They do have a lot of trouble off the pitch. And they went into the start of last season in League Two with somewhat closer to a National League North budget. I think it will be similar again this year. It's going to be an uphill battle. The one thing I do think they have in their favour is a lot of them are expecting a dogfight. And I think, you see a lot of teams drop down from from the EFL and kind of expect to kind of just walk the league and, it'd be quite easy, plain sailing. I think Morecambe know what they're getting into. But from speaking to a few fans and, trying to gather what to put in this recruitment document I'm preparing, it kind of, a lot of them have kind of suggested that, the aim is to try and build a team that will keep them up next season. So I think it could be a season where I think they'll survive, but I would not be surprised to see them, struggle.
100%. We'll have to see how they do next year. Of course, a lot of content will be coming in the summer as well, about sides like Morecambe and potentially Carlisle who come down, and those who get promoted as well this season. As well, we also said, is there a prize for the Predictions League? No, there's no prize, but there's a forfeit for the loser. Whoever loses has to wear, we call it a rival team shirt. We're basically a side that we're not particularly fond of in the division because of past experiences or rivals, or rivalries, you could say. So, for example, my usual co-host is a Wealdstone fan, and his main side that his main rival would be Barnet. So he has to be kitted out in a Barnet top, Barnet shorts, whatever, wig, whatever at the end of the season. If he loses the Predictions League. He did it last year, wore the shirt. But I think what would be bittersweet for Barnet fans, if they can get promoted to the Football League and seeing someone like Paul, who's a Wealdstone fan, in a Barnet shirt, I think it'll be like, thank you, and see you later. And it'll be the icing on the cake, I suppose, for Barnet fans to exit the division. Whereas for me, we did say Rochdale, but I don't particularly have a hatred towards Rochdale. I wouldn't say I have a hatred towards this club, but there's obviously been a lot of banter on social media, and because of some of the recent matches between our sides, I suppose it would be pretty funny for the opposition to actually see me in this shirt. And that is, of course, York City. I'd have to wear a full York kit, basically, if I lose the Predictions League. So hopefully I don't. So, yeah, hopefully it's Paul in the Wealdstone, in the Barnet top, I should say. Anyway, we'll get on with the predictions now as we have been going for a long time and haven't started. Nearly 70 people watching at the moment, which is great numbers tonight. Starting things off with your side, Sam, Woking versus Eastleigh. A meaningless game for both sides, but I suppose players playing for contracts. I suppose both sides will be wanting to finish the season respectably, and both sides are not on the worst of form at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's, early kickoff. Woking are in great form at the moment. Eastleigh are a bit up and down. I can finally back Woking in an unbiased view because of the form they're in, which is brilliant. I've definitely seen in recent weeks, watching them, there are a few players that you think maybe wouldn't be getting contracts come the end of the season, definitely up their game a little bit. There are, I won't go and name names, but there certainly are a few who are, trying to stake their claim to keep their base in the side next season. But I just feel like it's hard to go against Woking at the moment, given the form that they're in. If you look at the 3 games in the league they've actually lost, they lost 1-0 to Wealdstone in the last kick of the game, and then the only other 2 losses they've had are York and Barnet. So I've actually gone for a 2-1 Woking win. I believe it's been Eastleigh rarely don't score. They're quite a clinical side at times. They'll often find the net at least once a game. So I think a 2-1 result's quite fair. Woking are in great form at the moment, and I expect them to be looking to finish the season that way too.
I'm agreeing with, I'll call Emo Mira, I think it is. I'm actually going for a 1-1 draw for this game. An interesting stat as well for Woking is the fact that they've actually got the 5th best home record in the division this season. But like I've said, both sides are on fairly decent form at the moment. Neither side have too much to play for. I could see it being a 1-1 draw. I don't think either side particularly score too many goals, which you could say might be surprising with some of the forwards that both sides have to their disposal, particularly Eastleigh with Paul McCallum. However, it's probably not been one of his best years this year for him. Overall, Chris Stringer's come in and said Luke should wear an Oldham shirt after all the garbage you'd given us. To be fair, it would probably have been between Oldham and York, but it probably would be more funny. I don't know, wearing a York top, particularly if they did go up through the playoffs too. We'll move on to the next game. We'll leave that one till the end actually. Yeah. Boston versus Gateshead. Boston need a point to survive. Gateshead hanging on to a playoff spot by the skin of their teeth. I can't even say the word. So yeah, it's certainly nervous times for Gateshead at the moment, and they'll be desperate to just get over the line. And a win here would certainly do them the world of good.
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird fixture really, because you got Gateshead at the top of the league in pretty poor form, and you got Boston down the bottom of the league in arguably the best form in the division. So it's really hard to kind of put a kind of grasp where this kind of fixture lies in terms of who's going to have the upper hand. I have favoured Boston in my predictions. Again, similarly to Woking in a way, it's quite hard to go against them at the moment. They're not drawing games very much either. They're actually seeing out 3 points each time. Disposing the teams, and they're digging deep when it matters. I think that fight will still be there for them. Gateshead do seem a side who are quite deflated, and on top of that, the risk taking they have when they play, in the way that they play out from the back and stuff. There's a large number of goals they conceded in recent weeks have been from individual errors. So I've actually gone for another 2-1 in favour of Boston. I think they'll see the 3 points through and secure safety for next season.
I'm actually going for a 1-1 draw. Both sides completely different aims at the end of the season with 2 games remaining, but one side in a lot better form, and surprisingly, it's the one towards the bottom. I just think Gateshead, they're so desperate to get a result, and they've proven at times, even when they've been on bad form, that they can pull a result out when they've needed to. For example, going to Forest Green and winning there. Boston, though, are no mugs at all at the moment. The form table suggests that in the second half of the season, I think they'd have actually finished third if in the second half of the season, which is just ridiculous considering their position. But yeah, I'm actually seeing a 1-1 draw for this game. For this game, yeah. And M actually is called Mark, so I do apologise, Mark. I was way off with that prediction, I suppose, of your name. Anyway, we'll move on to the next one. Dagenham versus Altrincham. Another game, 2 sides with totally different aims at the end of the season. Altrincham looking to try clinch a playoff spot. The 3-0 win away from home at Halifax may have come to a shock to a lot of people. They certainly deserve to win that game, and they're coming up against the Dagenham side, who are also not on the best of form either at the moment.
Well, it's quite a strange one with Dagenham, really, because they've actually only lost 1 of their last 7, which is it came as quite a big surprise to me when I saw that. Albeit there's a few draws in there, but they've won 3, drawn 3, lost 1, and they lost to a Gateshead side who again were fighting for a place in the top 7. But it really is just that question for Dagenham now of, is what they do from this point onwards going to be enough? And the same goes for Altrincham, really. It seems like they ran out of gas at the wrong time. They look to shoe in for the playoffs, but they do seem to really be again another one of those teams who just seems to run out of steam a bit too early and kind of clinging on now. I think it's 2 teams that are going to be they're going to be both looking to grind it out. They'd rather take something than nothing. So I've actually gone for a 1-1 draw here. The form for Altrincham and their how clinical they are in front of goal seems to have kind of dried up. And at Dagenham, will be absolutely fighting for their lives. So yeah, I think a draw with both teams picking up something will be what I'm going to go for.
Altrincham not being on the best of form overall. So it'll be interesting to see how much you actually read into that Halifax game, whether it was that Halifax was so poor that anyone would have beaten them, or if Altrincham did produce a masterclass. For me, I think it is a bit of both. I think they exploited us in areas where we were weak and their best players were available. For example, Linney's been moved to the wing at the moment, and then you've got Newby on the other side. And our wing backs at the moment are probably where we're most vulnerable. So coming up against those two, it was never going to be a good day for Halifax, I suppose. In this one, though, Dagenham, desperate to survive. It'll be a really nervy game, I think, for both sides. Both sides will be desperate to win. But I think Altrincham will have enough to actually come off winners here. I think they've got the better team overall. And I think that shows with the table. And I think they're going to win this game 1-0. We'll move on to the next fixture then, which is, of course, Ebbsfleet versus Maidenhead. Ebbsfleet, nothing to play for. Maidenhead, desperate to win. They have to win this game. Anything but winning it more or less confirms that they will be going down next season and playing in the National League South. In terms of having any easier game, you'd love to have Ebbsfleet away, but I suppose for a side like Maidenhead, it's not always the best to be playing at a side like Ebbsfleet based on recent history.
Well, that's the thing. It's a situation where there is no pressure on Ebbsfleet whatsoever, and there is all the pressure on Maidenhead. But like you said, I think in terms of who you want to play in this situation, I don't think there's a better side at the moment than Ebbsfleet. I have, like I said, I've watched the last few Maidenhead games and I've not been particularly impressed. But I think the one area I've not been very impressed with is their defending of the 18-yard box and, their inability to clear crosses and, struggling against bigger centre forwards and, people who have a bit more of a presence. I don't think Ebbsfleet particularly have that up front, and I think that'll work in Maidenhead's favour. So I've actually gone for a 2-0 Maidenhead win. I think the likes of Brendan Kiernan, they've brought him in on the right wing, and I think he's done a really good job since coming in. He's offered that extra bit of experience that they really need. And Reece Smith's always a dangerous asset to have on the pitch. It just didn't quite click for him on Monday, but he was causing problems. So yeah, I think Maidenhead will win 2-0, and I think they'll come down to the final day for a bit of a blockbuster finish.
Yeah, I think as neutrals, we would love to see it go down to the final day overall. And in terms of being tactical, this probably isn't the best prediction at this stage of the season from myself. However, a few of my freak results have come off. People who probably not watched the podcast will not believe me with this one, but Aldershot, I think, beat someone 4-3, and they actually got the prediction right. So I got very lucky with that one. This is my freak result of the game week. I'm actually going to go for Maidenhead to win 3-2. So not as much, but both sides are capable of scoring a lot of goals. Both sides defensively, very poor. When I've mentioned that, I do need to correct myself. Ebbsfleet been capable of scoring a lot of goals. Recently, they have. They've scored a lot more than what they were doing. Maidenhead have got a strong forward line that I think all three players there in Mikulski, Smith, and I think Abrahams. Yeah, I think it's Abrahams. I think all three of those you'd like to think will be getting snapped up with other National League clubs next season. Whereas both defensively are very poor, and I think this will be a bit of a cracker, and I think it's going to be 3-2 to Maidenhead. Moving on to the next fixture, it's my team, Halifax versus Braintree. Two very defensive-minded sides. It's a huge match for Halifax, but it's probably not going to be the most entertaining game to watch. It's not one that particularly catches my eye. What about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same lines. Both teams are quite sensible teams, I like to think. They put defensive structure before any offensive play. Steve Pitt does have Braintree playing at the moment. They have lost Jermaine Francis quite recently and Kyrie Slisby, both recalled from their loans, which definitely, throws a spanner in the works for them. But, they really do seem to have that structure and ability on the pit at the moment. And they've shown, beating Barnet, they're capable of, competing with anybody at this stage of the season now. Halifax, like we've mentioned, they're riddled with injuries at the moment, missing the likes of Smith and Scott High. There's some big names missing. And, I have actually gone for a draw in the end. I did go for a 1-1. I can see Braintree going ahead early and Halifax kind of, picking one off late in the game and, salvaging a point that keeps them just alive for the final day.
I agree with you with a draw, but I can't see either side being able to score against each other. Halifax have scored 1 goal in 6. Braintree have kept 3 clean sheets in the last 5. Actually, 3 of their last 5 are actually 0-0 draws as well, which kind of tells the story and the narrative of what could potentially happen in this game. I think Halifax, with the amount of injuries that they've got, it's actually affected them going forward, although none of the injuries are really forward players apart from Max Wright, who hasn't scored a goal all season anyway. But when your midfield's out injured, you can't get further up the field. They drive you up the field. For example, Jack Evans, Scott Hyde, they carry the ball up the field. They're ball carriers. They can move the ball quickly. At the moment, we've got no energy in the midfield. We're relying on fringe players that have been fringe players all season to come in and step up, and they're simply not performing. And a lot of the new lads haven't settled in like you would have hoped. This has to be a must-win for Halifax, but I can't see where the goals are going to come from at the moment. I think it speaks for itself. 1 goal in 6. Yeah, I'm going to go for a 0-0 draw. I can't see us doing it the easy way and winning this game and confirming a playoff spot. So I think it'll go down to the final game against Wealdstone, and I can just see Wealdstone needing something. And everyone knows that me and Paul get on along very well. We're both co-hosts. It would really be nice, to be honest, for that game for us both to have something to play for, because at full time one of us is going to be celebrating and the other one's going to be absolutely devastated. So, yeah, hopefully we can both get the job done this weekend in our games, but I just can't see it happening. Next game that we'll move on to, Forest Green versus Oldham. This could be a huge game in terms of how it affects sides in the playoffs. Now, at the moment, both sides both set to finish inside the playoffs at the end of the season. Forest Green are going to finish in the top 3 now. Oldham will likely finish 4th or 5th. The reason I say this is because these sides could easily be playing each other in the semi-final. At the moment, if it stays how it is and Oldham win their game against 7th, I think they would actually play Forest Green, if I'm correct in saying that, at Forest Green. So This could be a playoff fixture. I actually think Oldham will win this. Forest Green have been very poor overall recently. I know they won on Monday against Tamworth, but if you look at the form overall, it's been very disappointing. They lost at home for the first time this season to Gateshead. Oldham, for them, if they can pick up some form, which they are doing at the moment, into the playoffs, then they're a side that if I was a York, a Forest Green, I've been wanting to avoid and hoping that someone else can knock them out in the early stages, because I always have this feeling with Oldham, they're built for the playoffs rather than the actual National League this season. I think they've got a squad that will do well in the playoffs. Being away from home, the pressure's off them, not being at Boundary Park. They've got a good away record overall. They've got a lot of experienced players. I think in the playoffs they'll do well, and I think they'll do well here as well in the league at Forest Green. So I'm going to go for a 2-1 Oldham win. How do you see it going?
So for a game that's 3rd versus 4th in the league, I think it's actually going to play out as quite a low quality football match.
Mm-hmm.
Both teams are definitely not at their best in terms of where they have been at this stage of the season. Both teams play direct football. Have had a few dips in form as of late, and they're kind of again two sides who are just kind of scraping by at the moment, and in terms of securing the places, they're not doing it with any conviction. I've gone for another draw. I think it's two teams that will just hold each other to a stalemate. I think they're both, they'll look to play direct to their target men, take very little risks. I've gone for a 1-1 draw, but there is a part of me that wants to say, Oldham might nick it. But I think, I've just got to go with my gut. I think a 1-1 draw is probably, accurate. Again, I think both teams will be trying to make sure that, I think Forest Green are confirmed 3rd now, but Oldham will just be trying to make sure they keep that 4th place now. And I think the pressure will be on. I did mention yesterday, I think there's a little lack of energy in the Oldham side. And I think the same goes for Forest Green really as well now. I think they're both a bit burnt out, and I think that shows, the average age of the squads. I think they just lack general energy. But, I think a 1-1 draw is my prediction for this one.
I actually think Oldham, for me, only getting started. I think if they keep this form up in the playoffs, I'd fear them. Beating Hartlepool, getting a point away at York like they did, they've got Forest Green away, very winnable, I think, at the moment, if you look at Forest Green. And then they've got Ebbsfleet at home on the final day. They could easily pick up 2 wins in those 2 games. I say easily, actually. Maybe not away at Forest Green, but it is doable for them overall. And that would make have a bit of momentum going into the playoffs, which is crucial. We've seen in the past, sides who do well in the playoffs tend to be sides that are on form going into the playoffs, and I think Oldham will be looking to do that. They've confirmed a playoff spot. There's no pressure really on them now. I don't think they'll be too bothered where they finish. Some Oldham fans will want to be at home. Some may even want to be away based on their away form. But for me, overall, I think they'll do well in the final 2 games, and I could see them being a difficult side in the playoffs. However, for you, I get the impression you think neither of these sides will do well based on them being burnt out.
It's funny you say that, actually, because I do think come round to the playoffs, I do kind of share the opinion in which Oldham are probably a team who are made for the playoffs. I think in terms of, I feel like in terms of playing a 46-game season, I see the aspect where, they've got an experienced older team, and I can imagine, they're kind of, that they maybe don't have the energy to maintain consistency. But also when it comes to the playoffs, I do understand it, and I kind of get the point in which, the experience can, this isn't going to be their first rodeo. They've been there, done it, and that can, experience can go a long way in big high pressure games. So I did a prediction the other day for the playoffs, and I do think Oldham might be one of those teams who might end up getting to the final in the playoffs, and I think they do have quite a good chance. But I think up until those playoffs, I think they'll probably just kind of cling on to that 4th place spot. And, once they do get into the playoffs, we'll start to kind of almost feed off the pressure of other opposition and take advantage of that.
Rochdale versus Hartlepool. Rochdale actually dropping points to Fylde at home, a 0-0 draw. That was very surprising. One of the more surprising results, considering Fylde are down and out now. And Rochdale's form prior to that was it felt like they were getting a bit of momentum again. As for Hartlepool, I think they won on Monday. Oh no, they lost, didn't they, to Oldham, I believe. Or that Good Friday. I might be getting mixed up now. I have a feeling they actually won. But I think Rochdale will have too much. 4th best home form in the division. Hartlepool not too much to play for. I think Rochdale will win 2-0. How do you see it going?
Yeah, I've got it 2-0 Rochdale as well. It's kind of been the story of Rochdale's season where when they come up against a team who are playing for a draw from minute 1, playing in a low block and inviting them to break them down, they do seem to struggle. Drew to Ebbsfleet earlier in the season, and they do seem to struggle to break teams down who invite it a bit more. Maybe it's to do with the tempo of the game that they play. Maybe it's to do with the fact they haven't got any players who can play a penetrating pass. But it's something they certainly will have to address next season if they do want to really kick on. I do think Hartlepool, they're a team who have nothing to lose at this stage of the season now, so there's nothing really to pointing towards them not giving it a go. But yeah, I think Rochdale will just, I think they'll just, come out on top on Saturday, and they'll outclass them. So I've gone for a 2-0 Rochdale win as well.
Tamworth versus Fylde. I think this is more of a prediction for the Predictions League than it really being an interesting game. Tamworth have got nothing to play for now, apart from maybe finishing inside the top half. Fylde maybe want to go down with, don't even know if you class it as a fight. I don't even know what you class it with. I think with pride, that'd probably be the best way of describing it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a hard one to. It's a hard one because neither side's got too much to play for. But I suppose you look at the league, you look at Tamworth at the moment, you look at the positivity around the club compared to Fylde, and you'd probably back Tamworth to win. I'm going to go for a 3-1 Tamworth win. How do you see it going?
So I also originally had it a 3-1 Tamworth win. I watched Fylde the other week at Woking in the game that relegated them, and for a team that had so much on the line, I've never seen a side so deflated and so poor. Yeah, they were really, really bad. I'd go as far as saying they were probably the worst team I've seen play this season in the National League. They chucked Nick Horton, who for me is the best player in the division. They chucked him out on the left wing, isolated him completely. And I feel like when you're in a situation that Fylde are, with the the joy and the luck to have a player that good in that situation. You've got to build the team around him and make sure that everything's coming through him and allow him to thrive. And they just weren't doing it. They isolated him on the left wing and they just offered absolutely nothing. They looks like they were just completely down and out. And I think now to the end of the season, I think they'll look the same. So I originally had it 3-1, but then I looked back to that game and thought they just didn't offer anything going forward. So I changed it in the end to a 3-0 Tamworth win.
To be fair, you speak about Fylde. Fylde, for me, since they've come into the National League, I've always thought, why are they in the position they're in? Whenever I see them play, I'm actually quite impressed by them. And if you actually look at the squad, there's some cracking individuals in that side, not just Nick Horton. We've spoke about Tyler Roberts being a promising young lad as well. Even Matty, I know he's more experienced, but he's a player that's played in the higher level. On his day, is capable of doing well in the National League and giving any fullback a game in this division. Eustace Bassey's been there. Even players that I've not seen too much of, but I look at their age and I look at some of the clubs they've been at and think they've got a bit of potential here. And for me, I look at Fylde and when I look in, I think it's a squad of individuals. And if I was other National League sides next season, I think there'll be a lot of teams going in for a lot of players at Fylde. I think their squad will be very different next season because I think not only Nick Horton, I think sides like Halifax, who haven't probably got the biggest budget, like to do the budget in quite smart and niche way. And they'll look at Fylde and think, you know what, I've seen signs of Tyler Roberts, that he's a capable player. I think he's been in a very poor Fylde with better players around him. He'll probably do well. And for me, I think Fylde squad will be very different next season. And I think a lot of National League sides will be looking to sign some of their players. Nick Horton will probably be the main man who everyone will be looking at. Obviously.
Definitely.
Who could you see him ending up at? Or do you think he may stay at Fylde, which you think would be silly for him? But
it's a really, really tricky question, that.
Lyle, maybe? I don't know.
I would have said, if they didn't have money troubles, I would have said Morecambe. I can also see maybe a Carlisle. I'm on the fence whether he ends up going to a National League, higher National League team, or if he ends up, trying his hand in League Two, because I think he's more than capable of it. But it's just whether he's coming 30 now. It's whether he wants to, he might look at it as a bit of a now or never, and I think that's personally how he should, because I think he can handle it in League Two. But whoever does get him will have a great player. But I just also wanted to touch on what you said as well about the individuals that Fylde have, and I massively agree with that. I think in terms of what they have, I think it's been a massive letdown of a season for them. One signing that's really, really disappointed me this year in terms of being underwhelming is Corey Whelan at centre back. I thought he'd be a really high quality centre back for them to sign this year, but he just hasn't seemed to click. And like you mentioned, one bit of joy they might have is Tyler Roberts signed on a permanent on contract till next year, and so is Ethan Mitchell, who I think is a very high quality defensive midfielder. They might be able to. I think those players are actually good enough for people to spend money on. So I think they could coop in a bit of money. Reinvest it into a squad next season and try and come back up. But yeah, this season's been really disappointing for me from Fylde's aspect.
This is probably a silly one as well to mention because of the amount of goals that Fylde have conceded. But Ben Winterbottom in goal for me, he's a good goalkeeper, a young goalkeeper as well. I think if he had a better defence in front of him, I think he'd have kept a lot more clean sheets than what he has done this season. And I actually think no matter what goalkeeper was in net for Fylde, I think they'd struggle and concede the amount of goals they have done, because defensively Fylde have been very poor. And I think we always thought Fylde would concede goals because of the way they play, but it's the fact that they haven't been able to produce the goals that maybe we expected to be able to do this season with some of the players that they do have going forward. But yeah, for me overall, very disappointed with Fylde this season. Someone's actually come in and actually said, can you imagine Oldham v Watford in a one-game playoff? It would be a huge spectacle for the National League. To be fair, I think I'd be hopping along over the Pennines to go to that one, because that would be a cracker, I can't lie. Particularly because
Oldham unbelievable
so long as well. Against the rival, it'd be amazing. Next game, Yeovil versus Sutton. A bit like the last game, I suppose. Neither side have anything to play for. Probably go for a 1-1 draw.
Yeah, it's again, it's just a bit of a nothing game. Two teams who are already confirmed to be playing in the National League again next season. It Again, like you said, it's just a bit of a nothing game. Neither side have kind of neither side have shown much this season in terms of you know they showed a little bit of promise here and there, but they've not shown it on a consistent scale. And they're also two teams that you don't really know what you're going to get until they kick off. They're two very inconsistent teams with two very polar opposite sides to them. I've gone for a 2-1 Yeovil win. Just no real reason behind it, if I'm honest. I think it's just a bit of a home advantage. Yeah. But yeah, again, it's one of those games where it's just both teams have been so inconsistent this year. It's so hard to predict how each team are going to fare until the game really starts.
100%. Moving on to the next one, York versus Solihull. Actually, we'll miss that out because it could be detrimental to the title race. So we'll keep those two until the end. This, for me, is actually game of the game. I think in terms of what's on the line for both clubs, I think it's quite an unpredictable game as well. A lot of people are saying what you're on about. Southend at home, they're big favourites. For me, I'd say no, because they've been so inconsistent of Southend, and Wealdstone have proven that they've been able to take points off some of the best teams in this division, including Barnet away from home a few weeks ago. For this one, it's a hard one to call. I think a lot of people will have very different predictions for this. I've actually gone for a 1-1 draw. Wealdstone just seem to have that never say die attitude where they can grind out results when they need to. And I think after dropping points to Maidenhead, it's proven to me that they need to get a result here just to give them a little bit of a cushion going into that final game. If Maidenhead are to win like I expect they will. As for Southend, I think they'll be wanting to win this game, but I think the opposite is for Southend. Whenever they've needed to turn up and they've got an opportunity to get in the playoffs this season, they've bottled it. And I think it'll be the case once again. And I think it'll be a 1-1 draw. How do you see it going?
So yeah, I look at the momentum at the moment Southend have, and I think there's a lot of backing for them at the moment. I'm sure Roots will be absolutely packed come Saturday because they know how much this game will mean to them. I think they're in a position at the moment where they're actually, I can't see them. Part of me can't see them losing, but then also the point you made as well, going into the fact that every time they've had that opportunity to kind of creep into the playoffs, they seem to have kind of bottled it a little bit. As for Wealdstone, having covered them on Monday, they should have won that game on Monday. Alex Reid very uncharacteristically missed a handful of chances. He could have had a hat trick, I think. Very, very unlike him. And if he's going into this game not firing, that's huge for Southend. I think they'll look at that as a huge positive. I've gone for a 2-1 Southend win. I think with the fans behind them and the momentum that they have, I think they'll just about see it across the line. But I think it'll be a really, really tightly contested game, and I think Wealdstone will kind of just fall short at the end, unluckily.
Moving on to the final two games, York versus Solihull and Barnet versus Aldershot. Starting things off with York versus Solihull. A few weeks ago, you'd say York, they couldn't have an easier game than Solihull Moors, yet Solihull have got 3 back-to-back wins out of nowhere. I'd like to think York can probably still win this one. However, I think it'll be a tricky game, a bit of an awkward game for York, but I think they'll get the job done, and I think they'll win 1-0. Which may keep the title race alive until the final day. You'll have to wait and see for me, Barnet versus Aldershot prediction. How do you see it going?
So yeah, it's another one of those games this match day where you've got one team with all the pressure on them because the other team have nothing to lose. Solihull are going into it, 3 wins on the bounce, but they're safe and have no chance of getting playoffs. So they're not really there to fight for anything. They're purely there just to try and spoil York's day. However, I do think with the form that York are in at the moment, they may have had a little blip against Oldham. I would say, Oldham gave them a good game on Monday. There might be a little cause for concern, but all in all, I think York will have the ability to pull through when it matters. So I've gone for a 2-0 York win.
I don't blame you, but I was either going to go 1-0 or 2-1. I think it'll be a really tight game, me, for some reason, but I do think York will get the job done. And moving on to the final game, Barnet versus Aldershot. Barnet are strong favourites. They've not lost a game at home all season. Coming against an Aldershot side, to be fair, what may keep York's dream alive is the fact that Aldershot do have quite a good record against the better sides this season in the division, particularly away from home. I think they've beaten Halifax, Altrincham away, Oldham away. Most recently, of course, lost to York, but away from home, I think they actually drew to Forest Green away as well. So they've got quite a good record against sides away from home. But can I really see Aldershot going to Barnet and winning there, which is needed to keep the title race alive when Barnet haven't lost a game at home all season? For me personally, no. And I think what's going to be the one thing for Barnet is the fact that there has been this stigma attached to them that they have bottled in previous years. This season, they've proven everyone wrong up until now. However, this title race, I think Barnet fans would like to think should have been done and dusted when you think of some of the games they've dropped points to. Wealdstone at home, Eastleigh at home. This is where it's going to really test them, where the pressure is on them to actually prove everyone wrong, not only just to get back to the Football League, but to prove everyone wrong that, listen, we can get over the line. This team is capable of getting over the line. And I think they're going to do it in style. Aldershot defensively, been very poor recently, not on form at all. Barnet, I think, are due to obliterate someone, to put it bluntly. And I think they're going to win 4-1. I think Aldershot will actually score early, and then I think Barnet will come back and comfortably win and put on a bit of a show at the half for them to get promoted back to the Football League. I'm actually going to go for a 4-1 Barnet win. How do you see it going?
So yeah, we've gone through a similar thought process. So I'll credit to Aldershot in the terms that they are. No matter what form they're in, they're always entertaining to watch. In the way that they're either they can go out and smash a team, but they're also capable of going and being smashed. They're in really poor form at the moment. I think a few players are probably a bit nervous about getting injured for the trophy final, and Tommy Widrington's kind of hinted towards some contract trouble at the moment with certain players. So it seems like there is a bit of unrest there. And I think, like you said, Barnet, I think they'll be looking to kind of dispose of that kind of like stigma around them, maybe not having the mentality. And I think they could go and absolutely, smash Aldershot at the weekend and, win this with meaning. So I've actually gone for a 4-2 win for Barnet. I do think Aldershot, again, they have the capabilities of scoring goals. The likes of Barrett always seems to thrive in bigger games, when the pressure's on for them, and seems to come up with a moment of magic here and there. But I think Barnet will just will turn them over with ease and win the title.
Yeah, and that would, of course, mean that they're back in the Football League. That more or less wraps up the podcast then, everyone. These are the scores at the moment going into the final 2 game weeks. We've talked about title races tonight. The one in the National League may be dead now. It may well not be, but it's looking like it's going to be after Saturday. However, we've certainly got our own title race between me and my usual co-host, Paul. However, he's getting loads of people to come in and try and win this for him, like Sam. Probably the worst person I could have asked onto the podcast in terms of the Predictions League, because you analyse the National League with a lot of thought. But I suppose the only thing in my favour is the fact that predictions are predictions and they're very unpredictable.
Oh yeah, it's the toughest league. It's the toughest league to predict around. Honestly, anything can happen. Twists and turns, left, right, and centre. So yeah, I've been trying to predict as many games as I could this year, and I've really, really struggled. I think the best I've been able to do most match weeks is predict 6 at most. So it's a tricky one to predict.
It certainly is, and of course with 2 game weeks remaining, it could be done and dusted hours very easily if you do outdo me with the scores. And I have noticed tonight we've gone for a lot of different scores as well, which will be a good thing, I suppose. Maybe not going into the final game week, because one of us could be more or less home and dry and not having to wear you don't have to, but one of me or Paul may be home and dry and not having to wear a York or Barnet top come the end of the season. But no, Sam, I do appreciate you stepping in tonight once again.
Yeah, no problem. It's always a pleasure being on the podcast. I really enjoy my time on it. So yeah, it's a pleasure to have stepped in once again.
Brilliant. I'm sure we'll find a way to get you on the podcast once again when the playoffs is around and everything, because it'll be great to have you on the pod once again before the season does come to a close. But no, thanks to everyone that's tuned in tonight, and thanks overall for the season. Of course, I'm hoping to do one more show on the preview with me and Paul for the final game week predictions. But just for myself, I just like to say a massive thank you to everyone that subscribed or followed the podcast this season once again. And one more game week to go, and hopefully I'll win the predictions league. Please remember to like and subscribe. Check out our sponsors, Cards Accepted, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.